Good evening, everyone. It is once again Ted the Speed Learner, and this is yet another edition of my For My Students video series. And this particular video response is going to go out to Alex Jones as well as David Wood. So I want to welcome both of you here right now. Now, for those of you who have not yet read my Kindle book entitled The Key is Logic, a lot of this is not going to make much sense to you. However, if you have read that book, or if you have a degree in logic, a lot of this will make sense to you. Okay, now then, let's go through this, shall we? There will be time markers in the description below to show you which part of this video belongs to you. But you can watch the whole thing if you want. Okay. The first part of this video will be addressed to, and I saw this on the internet, okay? They had one photo of President Trump's inauguration. Then they had another photo of the Women's March. Alright, now, a lot of people discussed the fact that neither the photo of the inauguration nor the photo of the Women's March had a timestamp on it. You say, well, it had the date on it. It had the date to be sure, but it did not have the time of day on it. Now, that's one significant fact. However, there was another fact that everybody overlooked. And what was that fact? If you look on the right side of both of those photos, you will see a road. Now, during President Trump's inauguration, that road was blocked off by the Secret Service. And the reason for that was for the inauguration parade. Now, the next day, it wasn't blocked off because there was no inauguration parade. Now, how could people be standing on that particular road on the day of Donald Trump's inauguration if the Secret Service had blocked it all off? They couldn't. But nobody brought this up. I'm really surprised that they didn't. And hopefully, Alex Jones, you will bring this up. And if you don't, I hope somebody does. I hope it is talked about. I hope it is discussed. And you can leave any comments you want right down here in the comments below. Okay, the next thing I want to discuss is this travel ban, okay? Now, from what I understand, and I still have insufficient information on this, but from what I understand, there is a difference between immigrants holding green cards and immigrants that have just been given visas. From what I understand, the ones with the green cards have guaranteed protections under the Constitution. However, the ones with the visas don't. Now, there is a dispute with some Article 8. It's in the U.S. law. It's Article 8. And Donald Trump has been using this to justify his travel ban. However, they're debating that against the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. And I hope they get this all worked out, because I don't want to see a conflict between United States law, Article 8, and the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. They're literally battling each other out. And I hope somewhere along the line Congress will take action and resolve this once and for all. It needs to be really resolved with Congress. They're the ones that pass the laws. Either they need to amend the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, or they need to amend Article 8. I'm not sure which one they're going to do, but they need to amend it to address this particular issue. And I'm sure that the courts and the Congress will resolve this at some point. Okay? But Congress right now needs to take some kind of action. What that will be, I don't know, but I think Congress should take action right now. Now, the third thing I'd like to address is this Jesus was a refugee by the Reverend Al Sharpton. Now then, and I hope you excuse me on this. I know this has happened to you before, Alex Jones, and I guess it's happening to me too. Sometimes I just get choked up. Okay, here's the case. Now, what people don't know is that there was a relationship between Mark Antony and Cleopatra, okay, at the time of the birth of Jesus. Okay, and that's, I don't know the exact story. I'm sure somebody's going to tell me the whole thing, but somehow those two got Egypt into the Roman Empire. I don't know the exact story about this, but they did. Okay, so Egypt and Judea were both part of the Roman Empire at that time. Okay, there was actually a border that separated Judea from the Parthian Empire at the time. Okay, so if you went a little bit past Judea, you ended up in the Parthian Empire. And it was a very unsettled border at the time. It was a peaceful treaty, obviously, because Octavian made a peaceful treaty with the Parthians to set up this border. However, Mark Antony and his soldiers were not particularly fond of Parthians. Why? Because they lost to the Parthians during a battle in which the Roman Empire tried to take over Parthia. That's why they had to create the border in the first place. But at that time, Egypt and Judea were both controlled by the Roman Empire. Now let's contrast this with what's happening in our world today. The state of Illinois is a state. The state of Indiana is a state, but they are both controlled by the United States. Okay? So, when Jesus took his trip, it would be the equivalent, okay, in his time he took his trip from Judea to Egypt. But if we wanted to find an equivalent match to our situation today, it would be like traveling from Illinois to Indiana and moving from Illinois to Indiana. Okay? Yes, the provinces were a little differently ruled, but as far as Jesus being still in the Roman Empire, even though he had traveled to Egypt, well, that's the way it is. He just basically moved from one state to the next. Or in this case, one province to the next. So to call Jesus a refugee from the Roman Empire is false. This is logically false. They say, well, how do we contrast with the Syrians today? Well, the United States does not control Syria. We don't have our flags in Syria. We have, from what I understand, maybe some of our military has gone over there. I don't know what the exact situation is. I'm sure Alex Jones will fill us in on the blanks on that one. But somehow I think we got some kind of a small military presence in Syria. But we do not control Syria. It's not a United States territory. It's not a state of the United States. It's never been formally declared a state of the United States. So for Al Sharpton to call Jesus a refugee is just absolutely false, if you look at it logically. It's a false statement. He should not have made it. Period. Okay, now that we've covered these three particular topics, alright, I'm now going to go ahead and cover one more thing, and this one's pretty much going to go out to David Wood. Now then, I just thought you would find this interesting. If you don't, that's fine. I can understand that. But I know a lot of my students will find this very interesting. Stand by. Alright. This is a question I'm asked all the time, so I'm just going to go ahead and answer it here. The Roman Empire, at the time of the life of Jesus, and of course a while after that, did not, when you're talking about the alphabet, okay, the Roman alphabet, first of all, the word alphabet is derived from the Greek letters alpha and beta. That's true. And at the time that Jesus was alive, most of the Jews at that time spoke fluent Greek. They weren't really that big on Hebrew anymore. Now, yes, the Torah was written in Hebrew, that's true, but the majority of the population spoke fluent Greek. Okay, now then, Well, what about this Roman alphabet? Well, this Roman alphabet had 23 letters. Our alphabet has 26. Now this becomes very important if you're ever watching the movie Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And if you don't understand what I'm talking about, if you don't comprehend what I'm talking about, go ahead and watch that particular movie and you'll begin to realize why it is that it's so important that you know that the Roman alphabet only contained 23 letters. Okay? Now then, the missing letters, the ones that we have in our alphabet that they didn't have in their alphabet, are the letters J, U, and W. This is very important. Okay? So, you say, well, what does this have to do with anything? Well, it has something to do with the Gospel of John, chapter 5. And I'll go through this for you. As we approach Easter, and we're quickly approaching Easter right now, we often overlook crucial details. And what I just said to you was crucial, but we're going to get into more of them in just a second. Now, the Romans under General Pompey took over the land of Judea. This placed Herod as the king of the Jews at that time. Okay? As a matter of fact, Herod overthrew a Parthian king. Now that becomes very important not only in this discussion, but in another discussion as well. But we'll get into that into another day. Okay? This meant that the people of Judea suddenly had to pay taxes to the Roman government. Alright? And the Roman coins they were using to pay the Roman taxes were stamped with pagan symbols. And this becomes very important to a parable of Jesus where he was talking about give to Caesar what is Caesar's. Even Jesus himself, not to mention the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and whoever else was in charge of the Judean people at the time, nobody wanted those Roman coins inside the Jewish temple. And I think you can comprehend why. Okay? Now, you say, well, is there any proof that they paid these Roman taxes? Yes, I have a hyperlink down here in the description below. You can see this for yourself. Now, the people of Judea also had to pay taxes to the Sadducees who controlled the temple at the time. And this was a tax, a temple tax, to maintain the temple. Now, you say, what kind of coins did they have to use? Well, to pay the taxes, I'm pretty sure all they had to use was their Roman coins. However, there was something else that the Judean people had to pay to the Sadducees, and you'll see this in just a second. Several times a year, the people of Galilee were expected to travel to Jerusalem from Galilee to attend temple feasts, including the Passover. And as we all know, Easter and the Passover are pretty much, they're celebrated at the same time. That's what it is. We as Christians have Easter, they have, the Jews have the Passover. But they're celebrated at the exact same time. Okay? The distance from Galilee to Jerusalem was approximately 90 miles. Now, that's no big deal for people like us today. We have our cars, we just travel along. A couple hours later, we're where we need to be. They had to walk this by foot. Okay? So basically, these people walked about 20 miles a day at that time. Okay? So pretty much it would take those kind of people approximately 4 days to travel from Galilee to Jerusalem. Depending how, Galilee was a kind of a vast land, so depending on where you lived, whether you lived in Bethlehem, you lived in Nazareth, or some other town in Galilee, that was a pretty long walk. Now, anybody that's familiar with the Old Testament, the Torah, okay, is well aware that the people of Judea had to make annual animal sacrifices for their sins. That's where they get the 1-year-old male lambs without blemish. Now, imagine if you had to take firstborn 1-year-old male sheep all the way from Galilee to Judea to make this animal sacrifice, and you had to walk that animal for 4 days straight. Yeah, that don't work out too good. The animal could get injured, so on and so forth. Oh, they'll just put him in a wagon and carry him along. Ever carried a sheep for 4 solid days like that? Yeah, get to know your sheep a little bit. You'll know that that's a pretty difficult trip. Alright. So transporting animals, especially sheep, from Galilee to Jerusalem would have been a very monumental task. So, what these people did was they traveled from Galilee to Jerusalem without their sheep, and when they arrived, they bought sheep from the temple to make their sacrifices. But remember, Roman coins were not accepted into the Jewish temple, so they had to exchange their coins for Tyrian, let me find it here. It was Tyrian shekels. Now here's the problem with a Tyrian shekel. It's stamped with a pagan symbol too. Wait a minute. Now, the pagan symbol that was on it was the pagan god Heracles, otherwise known to you as Hercules. Now, people proclaim these days, they've done some research, and they have made a connection between Hercules and Baal worship. So, basically, they were taking pagan Roman coins and exchanging them for Heracles' image on temple coins. And these things were made of pure silver, so on and so forth. But that's what you had to exchange your Roman coins for these Tyrian shekels to buy your animal sacrifices inside the temple. There's some food for thought. Okay? Now, were the money changers honest with these exchanges? Not hardly. I have a web article right down here. There's a hyperlink to that in the description below. You can see this for yourself, and you can see just how dishonest these people were. So in other words, when you gave them your Roman coins, you weren't getting the full value for your Roman coins. That would be like if I was exchanging U.S. currency for Mexican pesos. But the value of the pesos was actually less than the value of the U.S. currency. When they gave the pesos back to me, I would have less money. They would actually take a cut of that. Nice little fee, huh? And guess who was profiting from that fee? That's right, the Sadducees. The same Sadducees that were getting money from the temple taxes. Yeah, they were getting cut of that too. So, now, what was the big deal about this temple anyway? Here's the big deal. At that time, if you wanted your sins forgiven and you wanted any healing whatsoever, you had to go to the temple. Now, that brings us to the pool of Bethesda. See, that name sounds familiar, doesn't it? Well, yes, there is a hospital in, well, it's very near the United States Capitol, and it's called the Bethesda Hospital. Really, there's a hospital named after Bethesda, and it comes from the pool of Bethesda. Ooh, yes. But this pool of Bethesda is near, I wouldn't say it's right next to the temple, but it's near the temple of Jerusalem. It's within literal walking distance. Okay, within a day you could walk from the temple in Jerusalem to the pool of Bethesda. So it's not that far away. And I suppose if you were up there on the top of the temple, you probably could see the pool of Bethesda from the temple. I'm not exactly sure about that. I'm sure somebody will correct me on that, but I'm sure that they probably could. So basically speaking, if you wanted your sins forgiven by God, or you wanted healing from God, which, by the way, you had to have all your sins forgiven before you could get healing from God. Isn't that nice? You actually had to go to the temple. So, the Sadducees are getting a temple tax as a revenue. And yes, it was used for the maintenance of the temple, but it was also, they took a cut of that and they made profit off of it. Plus, they're getting profit from the money changers. They're getting a lot of moolah here. So, when John starts the story in chapter 5, he refers to some Jews who watched Jesus heal a paralytic man on the Sabbath. He doesn't say directly that these particular Jews are Pharisees or Sadducees or anybody else. However, it is my firm belief, because they had the most to lose on this little proposition, that it was most likely the Sadducees who saw Jesus healing a paralytic man on the Sabbath day. Now, it was common practice, and you can see this in the Bible, okay, for the Pharisees and the Sadducees and whoever else was in charge to stand there and tell the crowds that Jesus was demon-possessed, because only God could heal you. Unless, of course, you're talking about demons. Demons could heal you too, but for an evil purpose. See what I mean? So, if you were possessed by God, you were possessed by a demon. That's the way it was. So I'm sure they were wandering around telling people, hey man, look at this guy Jesus. He showed up, he healed a paralytic man on the Sabbath, which, by the way, is both illegal because, number one, you're not supposed to heal anybody. That's supposed to be done at the temple. And two, you do it on the Sabbath day, so you're breaking the Sabbath day work law. Oops. So they're sitting there going, man, check out this Jesus. He's broken 2 laws right now. I'm telling you, this guy is nothing more than a demon-possessed heretic. He's committing blasphemy, for Pete frickin' sakes. So when they confronted Jesus about all this, Jesus said, I'm doing the work of my Father. And this is in verse 18. Alright, so John chapter 5, verse 18. Now then, actually, it's John chapter 5, verse 17. I'm sorry. So, the demon-possessed theory goes right out the window at this point. But it gets worse. According to John himself, the guy who writing this gospel right at that moment, the Sadducees themselves believed that Jesus had committed blasphemy, because now he was claiming that he was God. Okay, because if he's doing the work of his Father, then he is directly connected to God. Alright? Now, by verse 23, you get down in there, and John formally declares that people are supposed to worship Jesus. Now, as you know, the Sadducees had a real law about this. The only person you were ever supposed to worship was God, and the only place you were supposed to worship Him was in the temple. Now John's saying, hey, look, you're supposed to worship Jesus. That makes Jesus God. So, when Jesus told the Sadducees that he was doing the work of his Father, he was basically delivering 3 messages. 1, he was God. 2, they had to worship him. And 3, and he says it more than once, he knew and he prophesied that the temple would be destroyed by the Romans. He didn't exactly say when it would be destroyed, but Jesus himself said that the temple was going to be destroyed. Remember there won't be one brick on top of the other type thing? Okay. Now, if the temple's being destroyed, That's the Sadducee source of income. Okay? So basically what Jesus was saying here was, guess what? I'm God, you have to worship me, and now you're fired. He just fired them all. Imagine what the Sadducees thought about that. Boy, were they ticked off. That's why they wanted to on him. Yeah. See what I mean? So, anyway, and I'll read it again. John himself says in verse 23 of chapter 5, he says that all should honor the Son just as they honor the Father. To honor is to worship, and so therefore, okay? Because the words honor and worship were synonymous when it comes to the Bible. Alright. Now, what would the Sadducees have normally done in a situation like this? Well, I'll tell you exactly what they would normally have done. They would have had a nice little rock party. Get my picture? Unfortunately, the Roman Empire at the time controlled all of Judea. That meant that any penalties that were distributed had to be distributed by the Romans. Now then, you say, well, how could the Sadducees deliver punishment to Jesus if the Roman Empire controlled it? Well, this is how. They later on went up to Pontius Pilate. They said, look, buddy, you got a guy out here. He is amassing an army against the Roman Empire. And get this, if you try to knock off that army, Jesus is going to bring him back. That's right. I mean, this army is practically immortal. Now, what are you going to do about that? Yeah, you can see the complications there. That's why Pilate went after Jesus. It's like, oh man, I can't have an army coming after me that I can't defeat. Good night. Okay. Now then, there's something else that needs to be covered here. The first Christian converts were Jewish in nationality. That's true. They strictly adhered to the second commandment, which said, don't take the Lord's name in vain, and also don't mispronounce His name. Okay? When the New Testament was written, they did everything they could to not refer to God orally by His proper name. They had it in their writings, but not orally. They didn't want to offend God accidentally. Most of the, as I said before, most of the population at that time, of the Jews at that time, spoke fluent Greek. Okay, that's why the New Testament was written in Greek. Now, ancient Hebrew was comprised of nothing but consonants when it was first created. Later on, they started adding vowels on top of that. But at first, they were nothing but consonants. And the original Torah was written with Hebrew that had no consonants. Okay? So, in order to keep people from orally reciting the name of God, what these Hebrew people would do, these Jews, what they would do is they would put vowel markers on top of the name of God. And when you saw those vowel markers, you knew not to utter that name, but you were supposed to utter the word Adonai. A-D-O-N-A-I. Okay? Now, what happened was that when the Christians began their ministry, of course, they were including the Old Testament with the New. What they did was every time they saw God's name and thought of Adonai, they immediately translated that into the Greek word Kyrios. The Greek word Kyrios is, and I probably mispronounced that too, I'm sorry, but Kyrios is the Greek word that is the equivalent of the Hebrew word Adonai. Okay. Whew. Now, what does Adonai and Kyrios actually mean? It means my Lord. So you'll often see in the New Testament, the Lord, instead of the proper name of God. Now then, now we have to travel forwards in time quite a bit. We're going to now deal with a Spanish Dominican Catholic priest named Raymundus Martini. I'm not kidding you. Raymundus Martini. And let me make sure that... Yes. Okay. Now, this Raymundus Martini had no idea of the ancient Jewish practice of putting vowel markers on top of the name of God to make sure that people did not utter the name of God when they were reading the text aloud. He didn't know that. Why he didn't know that, I don't know, but he certainly didn't know that. So, what he did was he intermixed the vowels of Adonai with God's proper name of Yahweh, okay, and he formed the word Jehovah. But keep in mind that in the Roman alphabet there is no J, so I had to use I instead of J. Okay, but here's the problem. V and W are not the same letter. Okay, the Romans eventually incorporated W into their alphabet so that they could make references to texts like the Bible. But V and W are not the same letter. So when you have YHWH, what they were doing is they were substituting the letter W with the letter V, and it can't be done that way. It's not right. And this 12th century Catholic monk, that's what he did. He wasn't the only one that did that, but he was one of them that did. And we have an article about that, and I'm going to leave a hyperlink down here below. So, when the King James Version of the Bible first came out, okay, one of its first printings, not the very first printing, but one of the first printings of it, that particular Bible had the word Jehovah in replacing of Yahweh, which of course was incorrect. Now, it only had it in there 7 times in the Old Testament. Never in the New, just in the Old Testament. Okay? And the 7 times it appears is Genesis 22:14, Exodus 6:3, Exodus 17:15, Judges 6:24, Psalms 83:18, Isaiah 12:2, and Isaiah 26:4. Okay. That's where it originally appears. But it gets a little more complicated. When they refer to all this, whenever you're reading a powerful text that talks about all this or discusses it, and one of those texts, and you'll see what I'm talking about here in just a second, one of those texts I'm referring to is this one. It's called The Earliest Christian Artifacts, and in chapter 3 of this book, they go through all of this. This is published by Larry W. Hurtado, and you can read this for yourself. Buy a copy. You can find a used copy for a pretty decent price. If you read this, you begin to realize about the vowel markers and all this other stuff, but they have a word in here called a tetragrammaton. No, tetragrammaton. Let me break that down for you. Tetra is the Greek word for 4. As you notice, in the Hebrew Bibles, when they had the original Yahweh, it was YHWH. That's 4 letters. Right there. So, tetra meaning four refers to that. There are 4 letters in the original name of God. However, grammaton has 3 meanings. Not just 1, but 3. It can mean letter of the alphabet, it can mean word, and it can also mean gravity. So you can now start seeing the gravity of all this situation. Whew. Okay. So now things get a little more complicated. Now, there is a theory out there right now, and I'm going to have a hyperlink to a video that explains this theory. They are theorizing that there was some kind of massive electromagnet that was in the possession of the Egyptians at the time of Moses. And somehow Moses got it and took it out of Egypt along with the Israelites. Okay? And he placed it in the Ark of the Covenant. Now, if this being the case, it would have been powerful enough to have split the Red Sea wide open so he could just take them on through. He, from what I understand of all this, he somehow managed to give it to Joshua. Of course, you know, they had the Ark of the Covenant. He probably told Joshua about this electromagnet that was supposedly in the Ark of the Covenant. And they carried it across the Jordan River and split the Jordan River wide open. And you say, how powerful was this thing? If that's what it is. And like I said, that I have a hyperlink to a video that explains all this down here in the description below. You can see it for yourself. Get well educated. Now, it's not a proven theory. It's just a theory at this time. Be nice if it could be proved. But if this hypothesis is correct, that would put an interesting new spin on the Exodus from Egypt. But anyway, let's get down to the brass tacks here. How powerful was this electromagnet? It was so powerful that to merely touch the Ark of the Covenant, which was covered in gold, which would be a conductor of electricity, you can get yourself electrocuted. And that's what happened to some people that touched the Ark of the Covenant when they weren't supposed to. Boom! Goodbye! See what I mean? So what can we conclude from all this? Well, based on all the information I have just given to you, we know that the temple at the time of Jesus was a place of sacrifices. Animal sacrifices couldn't be walked 90 miles from Galilee to Judea. So these people that were coming from Galilee into Judea to Jerusalem to the temple to make their sacrifices had to exchange their pagan stamped Roman coins for Tyrian shekels, which had an image on there that people surmise as a reference to Baal worship. That's bad enough. The Sadducees ran this thing. They were the ones that collected the temple taxes. They were also the ones that controlled the money changers. So they were making quite a profit off of this. So when Jesus shows up at the pool of Bethesda and heals a paralytic man on the Sabbath day, no less. And I would just assume it would be the Sadducees. I could be wrong on this, but I'm just going to go with the Sadducees because they had the most to lose off of this. I mean, they were going to be instantly unemployed if this guy proved out to be correct, and if Jesus could prove himself to be God and said, look, hey, you have to worship me now. Okay? So if Jesus was correct, he was God, and people had to start worshiping him, which a lot of people started worshiping him at that point. This was going to lead to instant unemployment because that would mean that Jesus was formally shutting down the Judean temple. Wow, talk about getting ticked off. Whew. So, according to John, the person writing that gospel, Jesus was God, and he was getting ready to shut down the temple. Not like he was just going to walk in and say, hey, temple's closed, go away. But you did notice that Jesus went in with the money changers and he told them that they had turned his house of prayer into a den of thieves, proclaiming that he was indeed God. Jesus himself proclaimed it. So, it also means that the Roman alphabet had only 23 letters. You now know about the vowel markers over the name of Yahweh to keep people from uttering that name, etc., etc. That's a lot of information. Golly, if your brain hasn't, well, you know how it is when you eat something super cold like ice cream, all of a sudden you get that brain freeze. If you haven't gotten a brain freeze by now, I don't know what's keeping you from it. That was a lot of information. This is why I didn't make a whole lot of videos this week. By gollies, if you aren't well educated by now, I don't know what's keeping you from it. Woo! I know I'm tired. Anyway, I do want to thank you very much for watching me and paying attention to me and going through this with me and putting up with my occasional stuttering and stammering and occasionally losing my voice all at the same time. If you aren't so well educated by now, I don't know what's keeping you from it. I think you would get a real big A in ancient history by this point. Anyway, I will leave hyperlinks down here in the description below. You can see them for yourself. Feel free to comment, but if you do, at least take the time to read my Kindle book, The Key is Logic. I have made an audio version of that. You already saw that on my YouTube channel. That was another thing that was taking up a lot of my time. I finally got that taken care of and out of the way, so there you go. Anyway, enough about all that. Thank you very much for watching all this. Alex Jones, David Wood, please go ahead and comment. Leave comments down below. Let me know what you think. Woo! Alright. I will tell you more in a future video, so I would like for you to stay tuned.